Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are so happy to have Will Stolzenberg with us today. Will's book, Heart of a Lion, chronicles one pioneering lion's heroic journey from the Black Hills of South Dakota to a highway in Connecticut, busting myths and championing coexistence all the way. Will's writing delivers conservation science with heart, offering glimpses into the emotional lives of animals that we so often fear and sometimes even despise. His other books include Rat Island, Where the Wild Things Were, and his new children's book, Towpath's Tale. He says he's always felt drawn to speak for the maligned tribe of animals known as predators. So it's fitting that his work so often issues a call to kindness. Will, let's start with your book, Heart of a Lion. That one pioneering young lion made his way almost to New York City, and then he was tragically hit by a car and killed. Of course, there have been other cases of mountain lions traveling eastward into states where they are not currently known to live, but so far those have been rare. They do point to an exciting possibility, though, of lions reclaiming more of their historical territory. And I know you've done some thinking and writing about the rewilding of lions into the states where they aren't yet living. What would that look like, and how would that happen?
Sure. Yeah, I've done a lot of thinking about that. For one thing, one thing we would not see, we wouldn't be seeing lions behind every bush. We'd be very, very lucky to see lions if they were to establish themselves in the east. But one place we might start to see some differences is take the white-tailed deer, for example. I don't know, you folks are coming from California, you may not have to deal with this problem, but I recently come from places such as the Mid-Atlantic where deer are very, very plentiful there. In fact, deer in the east now are at some of their historically high abundances, unprecedented numbers of deer, and they're doing quite a number on the eastern ecosystems. And one thing that might, we see with cougars in the mix, we might just see a lot more spring wildflowers in the mix. We might see a lot more forest regeneration. Right now we have populations, dozens of populations, many of them rare, wildflowers that are disappearing because basically they can't get a toehold in this forest that are now pretty much populated with deer. Same thing with some of our understories. We now have these great grand forests where if you were to walk through one, you would say, this is a wonderful, this is a wonderful mature forest, but unless you're a forest ecologist, you wouldn't quite realize what was wrong with the picture. And that is, a lot of these forests now, they're like walking through a city park. There's nothing, there's these wonderful grand trees in the canopy, and there's nothing below. And, that's not a natural situation. I mean, I've actually talked to forest ecologists who have said that white-tailed deer are a bigger problem than climate change for some of the plants that we're most concerned about and some of the forests in the east. Another thing you might start seeing is a little bit difference in some of the makeup of our smaller predators. Right now we have unusually high abundances of what we call meso or mid-sized predators. Your raccoons and foxes and coyotes and possums and whatnot. Feral cats, another one that seem to be at very, very high abundances and are having a huge impact on some of our smaller animals and bird life. Bird life is another one to consider here. A lot of these, a lot of our songbirds don't nest very, very high in the canopy. After all, it turns out they nest in shrubs and on the forest floor itself. And these are the very habitats that are being impacted by white-tailed deer. So, and there's also the case of here we are, a lot of the people who live on the suburban edge or the urban edge, they're having to deal with deer every day, these big, huge herds of them that are marching in and destroying, thousands of dollars worth of landscaping. And, when they're through with that, they thumb their nose and walk up the deck and have their way with your potted plants. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that mountain lions could do for us. And other things, I'm talking about the ecological impacts, but there's also some personal things. If you don't care about birds, if you don't care about, some of the small mammals out there, another thing to consider is our own safety. Right now, there's over 1 million deer vehicle collisions every year in this country, and they cost us 200 of our lives, you know. So these are not insignificant things that some of the problems that deer cause for us out here. But thankfully, you know, we've now, there's been a study come out of the University of Washington that actually tried to enumerate just what the impact of deer would be on cougars re-entering the eastern United States would be on our own safety. And they determined that indeed, you know, we could save as many as 5 lives a year, $40 million a year, 155 people, you know, over the next 30 years, just from having cougars policing the place. So there's a lot of things that we wouldn't notice. We wouldn't notice the cougars, but we would certainly notice the knockoff effects for them having returned.
Yeah, also interesting. And I'm really glad that you're pointing out the many, you know, ecological advantages of having these lions on the landscape, which is so often overlooked. So many states would stand to benefit quite a bit from having the lions return to the landscape, but that rewilding would present some obvious challenges, of course. The first and most impactful probably is human fear. And as your book points out, that would bring these animals into proximity with humans who haven't seen them in over a century. So how could we prepare a way for them to repatriate their historical territory?
Okay, a few thoughts on that. Number one, and this, I know this is something that I'm really interested in lately, is teach your children well. You know, and we could prepare school children, you know, in these areas of the East and the Midwest where the cougars will be coming through, just what cougar biology is all about, just what these creatures are all about, you know, because they've probably been filled with a lot of myths and whatnot, the more the dramatic versions of the cougar story. And just to explain to them that these, you know, these animals are more fascinating than they are fearful. They're to be respected, yes, but yeah, they're not coming all this way to attack us. These are animals that are, you know, very important to our ecosystem, and we should welcome them. And there's many other places, for example, where people live very, very well with these. You know, and kids have a way of getting to their parents. You know, that's one thing. And you can stand here as an adult and argue all you want, you know, with somebody who's got their mindset. You're not going to get anywhere. But a kid comes home from school and says, you know, we should start recycling, or you know what, maybe we should, you know, maybe we should be nicer if a cougar comes to town, and you know, hope that we can start a conversation that way through the family. And the other half of that is you know, we have to get the law enforcement on board, the wildlife agencies, the ones who are going to be impacted most when eventually that cougar shows up in town. You know, these are the ones that so far have been the ones that, you know, when that stray cougar does eventually wind up in their neck of the woods, they've never experienced this before. Their initial reaction is to shoot, you know, save the public. You know, this animal is obviously a rampant predator that's out to kill people, and unfortunately, you know, it's a knee-jerk reaction. They don't understand cougar behavior, and there have been people who have tried to actually make some strides toward this. A colleague of mine, Jay Tichendorf, who's a former houndsman. He's a wildlife veterinarian, but a former houndsman who knows how to track cougars. He actually offered his services up to wildlife agencies some years ago for that very reason, to say, look, we know these animals are heading east, you know, and there's, you know, the eventuality is that you're going to meet up with one of these at some point. You should be prepared. You need to understand cougar behavior. You need to know how to act around them. He had no takers. And lo and behold, in 2008, guess what comes? Chicago, of all places, a cougar walks right into town. And I got to tell you, I've seen the videos of that. It looks like the Keystone Cops, you know, people running helter-skelter and yelling and you know, tripping over each other. And finally, when they do, they corner this poor animal who's just trying to get away, leaping over fences. Just, you know, this is a lost animal that wants out. They cornered him, and it was just like bam, 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 bam. You would have thought there was a war broke out. So it was really not a good day for the Chicago police and for cougars, you know, because that was one of those creatures that could have made it this way. So, Yeah, we education and remind them, this is something that we are dealing with in places like California. They deal with this every day. That Chicago cougar, if that had been Sacramento or San Francisco, where recently I wrote a blog about this animal that showed up in San Francisco this past summer. No big deal, they gathered the proper authorities. They cornered this animal. They netted him. He was small enough but they had the dart gun ready. They took him, gave him a check out of the hospital, and then took him back to where they think he came from. It was just like that, but they do that all the time. So it's really not that hard. It's just a matter of education.
Yeah. You point out, quite a few of the misperceptions and the myths, that plague these animals. And I wonder if you could erase just one of the most common or most troublesome misperceptions, is there one you would choose?
Yeah, that's an easy one. That they need to be controlled. They need to be killed. That's just that's just so rampant in so many states that that if we don't kill them, if we don't control them or manage them, which is just two other euphemisms for killing them, if we don't do this, they're going to multiply like rabbits. They're going to eat all of our deer, and then they're going to eat all of our livestock, and then they're going to come after our kids at the bus stops. And I sound glib saying that, but these are actual arguments that have been made time and time again in these wildlife commission meetings where people are considering whether how many lions they need to hunt. These are actual arguments that people bring up. So it's a real simple one. You don't need to kill them. They are self-regulating. They're territorial. When they have a certain number of animals that fit in a certain space, and if an interloper comes in, there's going to be trouble. There's a male that's going to, there's going to be trouble. There could be death. They kill each other an awful lot, and it's oftentimes over territory and space. You don't have to worry about them over reproducing. They're not rabbits. They do a very good job of policing their own population.
Yeah. They really do. And we've talked already a bit about the many different threats that these animals face, hunting, traffic. That lion you mentioned in San Francisco who got safely returned to the wild, only to very shortly after that be killed by a car. There's livestock grazing, perceived conflicts with humans, so many different threats that working in lion conservation and protection, it requires us to work on a broad range of issues. And so you do as well. And I wonder if you could, wave a magic wand. What would you do to better protect lions in the US?
Well, I just kind of gave, thanks for the wand, by the way. I just kind of gave it away. Number one, stop killing and trapping them. We don't need to do this. And it only causes more troubles. That's the thing. We think we're doing a big service by, slaying the beast, by getting rid of these monsters, but really it just causes more troubles. You disrupt their social hierarchy. You invite in the bad actors, the teens, you orphan kittens that end up starving, and these are the ones that are most likely are going to get into trouble. There really isn't any reason to kill mountain lions.
Yeah.
Oh, and all right, if I still got my wand, can I take another swing?
Yeah. It's a very powerful wand. It can take out a lot.
So yeah, I would stop building roads through their habitat, and in particular in critical places where, we're trying to bring them back. I live now in Southern Florida, where this is a big hot topic now, whereby, we have about 230 Florida panthers left, and they're bottled up down here. And right now they're thinking about running three major roads through the state, right through prime panther habitat. And we know right now there's, a little over 200 panthers. Upwards of 25 of them get hit every year on the road. That's 10% of the population is getting popped on the road, so roads don't do, and the other thing that comes with roads, you get sprawl, you get urban development, suburban development, and these are just the places where cougars are going to get into trouble, panthers in this neck of the woods. So yeah, stop building roads into their habitat, and when you already do have roads into their habitat, help them out. Build bridges, overpasses, underpasses, help find a way for them to get over these places because they wander so much and they get hit so much. This is really their lifeline for places that we have already carved up. You could at least extend them a hand by offering them a way out, in and out.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up roads and highways. It's such an issue, especially that's been in the spotlight for the California mountain lions and the petition to list them as a threatened species. Because so many of them not only face the danger of being hit by cars, but those freeways go through and cut up and fragment their habitat, so that then you have inbreeding because they can't freely travel from one area of their habitat to another. I'm really glad you
Absolutely.
you bring that up. Those wildlife crossings are so important. So your background is in biology. You put that to really good use in your work, of course, and you add some insight into the animals' physical lives, but also into their mental and emotional lives. And of course, science every day gives us more insight into the complexity of animals' mental and emotional lives. But it's still sometimes an area where scientists fear to tread. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about walking that line and why it's important really to talk about their mental and emotional lives and the complexity of their lives.
Yeah, you're right. It's a kind of a changing scene out there in terms of how much scientists want to admit that they have these emotional lives. But the fact is that we're learning so much through neurobiology and whatnot about what really goes on in these animals' heads. And the more and more we learn is that there's this great big gulf between us and them is narrowing all the time in terms of how we perceive things. These are animals that think. These are animals that have emotions, that have pain, that suffer, that have joy. They have so many similarities with us that it becomes it becomes more striking how moral it is that we just not willy-nilly decide that we want to do these animals harm. And in fact, there's now a competing sort of movement for conservation right now. It's called compassionate conservation, which accepts as two of its tenets that number one, do no harm, and number two, individuals matter. And see, these haven't been really high a priority for what has been the standard approach to conservation, which is, over the past 20 or 30 years has been conservation biology, which basically is concerned with diversity of life, right? We're talking about populations, genetic diversity, populations and species and ecosystems, trying to preserve the whole, by habitat alterations or preservation or reinstalling processes. Fire, flood, predation is another thing, but trying to keep all the pieces. Now, of course, that sometimes doesn't go well when you've got individual animals that may suffer for, the good of others. And I'm riding this line, firmly on top of the fence, because I go both ways on this. I think there's valid arguments for both sides of this equation. And, I faced this when I wrote the book Rat Island, which was a book about this cadre of swashbuckling conservationists who were going around to oceanic islands to make their mark, because this is where most of the extinctions are taking place. Because what's happening in these oceanic islands is we have animals that have evolved there that have never seen mammalian predators, and now with us shipping animals hither and don and whatnot, and to these islands that were untouchable until we came along, it's causing all sorts of havoc with animals that just aren't used to terrestrial predators. And the animals I'm talking about are like rats and cats and goats and mongoose and snakes, you name it. But these are animals that are making their way to islands where they're meeting a very naive and vulnerable population of, in many cases, like seabirds. One place in particular, it broke my heart to watch it, and you can see it too on YouTube. Is this place called Gough Island in the South Atlantic, which is renowned for having some of the last of the population of the Tristan albatross. These huge, magnificent birds that sit there, and unfortunately, a lot of times get eaten alive by mice. These mice that were shipped there, and they've grown big in the absence of any competitors, but they actually they start chewing on these animals as they sit there because they can't go anywhere. Now they don't know what to do when they're being attacked. And basically they chew holes into them and eat them from the inside out. I mean, it's one of the most grisly scenes you can imagine. And the poor animal, you can see it's just sitting there helpless, or they chew holes in their head. It's just the most heinous way. And, you know, they've just started a mouse eradication program. And this is what they've been doing on a lot of islands. The rats are some of the most frequent interlopers, and it's nasty business. They basically take helicopters and they carpet these islands with little pellets of rat poison to get every last one of them. Yeah, I mean, because you can't leave one. And so, you know, this is a case where who do you root for? The mouse? You know, these mice have brains too. These mice have emotions too. These mice can think. And I had to play both sides of this when I was writing this up, because it's happening time and time again. But at the end of the day, I had to say, you know, these are mice that if we eliminate every last mouse on this island, there's still going to be gazillions of them in the continents around the world, but there's only one last place for these poor albatrosses. And I just said, this has got to stop. And this is where, I think this is where some of the conflict is coming between the compassionate conservationists who would say, get out of the way, you know, we humans should not interfere. And I had to take the point in the story of that, yeah, I believe we should not interfere, but that ship has sailed. We've already interfered. We got the mice there in the first place. So
right.
You know, something's got to be done. And so, you know, and I've had conversations with compassionate conservationists who weren't budging on that one, said, no, they got to find a better way, which to me, you know, there may not be time. So it's a real tough one. And, you know, again, I'm hypocritical. I go either way on that. I was weaned on conservation biology, and I believe in the, you know, in the tenets of it. But then now, the more you learn about these animals, you have to be considerate. And that's one thing that I hope that some of these island rescuers are doing. They're doing great things for endangered species. But one thing I hope that they are considering is non-lethal options. I know it's really hard to imagine sterilizing a bazillion mice, or something, but somehow they've got to find a better way than just slaughtering these animals.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I mean, you did such a great job of just illustrating those impossible choices, but they're all these unintended consequences, right, of humans going in and tinkering with things. And, you know, of course, the best way out of that is for us humans to stop creating these situations where we're faced with these impossible choices. Your book, Rat Island, is just such a great exploration of those situations. I mean, I highly recommend it. I mean, along with your other books, but yeah, that's an eye opener. That situation just on this little island where suddenly you've got this predator introduced to all of these animals that have no natural defenses because they didn't evolve around these creatures. What a mess. It's just very sad.
Tragic. Yeah. So
in developing a kinder approach, you know, to conservation and to mountain lions in particular, struck by that situation that your protagonist faced in the heart of a lion, where, you know, he's an eastward dispersing lion. He would encounter communities that, of course, haven't seen a lion in 100 years. And in that century, you know, humans have greatly changed the landscape, of course, and they've greatly expanded your field of knowledge about wildlife and hopefully about conservation biology. But many of those age-old fears and misconceptions have not changed very much in 100 years. It seems to be, you know, where those human fears and attitudes aren't keeping pace with some of the other change. And so given that, I mean, how do you rate your level of optimism for the future of human and lion coexistence? I mean, especially if they do more rewilding into eastern states.
Yeah, good question. First of all, I have to tell you, I'm not an optimist by nature. You know, my glass is always half empty. But I will say this, that in terms of the lion, I'm actually very optimistic about the possibilities for it. A couple things going on here. Number one, we've got California as an example. This can be done. You know, California is the one state in the union that has lions that doesn't shoot them. There's a democratic opinion, a democratic opinion there that says we shall not, you know, as the populace, we, and on the whole, decided we don't want to hunt our mountain lions. And the experiment is doing wonderful things. I mean, it's basically showing that they don't have any more attacks on people, livestock, or their game animals. They're doing just fine without having to hunt their lions. So why would you do that anywhere else? So the model is there. All you have to do is, you know, you don't have to do anything. You just have to get the animals eastward to let them do their magic, you know. And the other thing is that we, you know, places where people have done surveys in the East, they've done them here in Florida, they've done them in the Northeast, and said, how would you feel about having these animals back? And, you know, over 70% of the people in both cases said, sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, they weren't saying, well, don't put them, you know, in my yard, but you know, we can live with mountain lions and puma and panthers. We can do this. So the problem is right now that a lot of the wildlife decisions in this country are being made by a very small minority of the wildlife agencies, or primarily hunters, ranchers. I mean, the commissions that actually make the actual decisions or push them in that direction. These commissions are political appointees who are made up mainly of, like I say, hunters and ranchers, agricultural interests, white males. You know, and they're not the majority. The thing is, the majority of people would welcome this cat back. We just have to give the majority their voice, and I think this is it would happen very well.
Yeah, yeah, and so much of that just comes from you know, people knowing what the issues are and being empowered to speak up. Something that, of course, you and your work and the Mountain Lion Foundation and our work, we're working on every day. But I'm glad to hear you're optimistic about that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about how more recently in your career you have ventured into a new genre and you've written a children's book, Towpath's Tale, and it tells the story of your own dog. And it also has a message about the importance of kindness, and in some ways that's, you know, that's so fitting, like I mentioned in the intro, with your career's work, because it speaks to kindness and standing up for the underdog.
Yep.
And so I want to talk about, you know, to what degree you see that as a driving force in your work. And then I think maybe we have an opportunity to meet Towpath and learn a little bit about his story.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, it is the primary driving force in my work. I mean, and I have to keep reminding myself of that, because a lot of the subjects that I cover are actually very gloomy. You know, I remember my mentor back at the Nature Conservancy when I first signed on as one of their associate editors. He took me to his office very first day and said, "Well, got to tell you something." You know, and he sees this very intimidating, you know, presence, and he says, "This is a battle we can't win. The best we can do is beat an orderly retreat." It just took the wind right out of me. You know, I was all gung ho. You know, I was going to save the world, but he was right. You know, but there's one thing I've come to accept, that may be the reality of it, but it doesn't stop me from saying, well, what am I going to do with my life? I might as well fight. I might as well help beat this orderly retreat if that's what we're facing. And kindness has really come full circle, because that's where I think a lot of us, when we get into this field in the first place, scientists or conservationists or journalists in my case, we get into this because there's this something in our childhood, or we have an epiphany somewhere down the road that says, wow, these creatures, these places, they're amazing things. You know, I want to do something for them. It's an emotional thing. It's not, well, I want to save populations. You know, most people get into this because they're really, it's a matter of kindness. They want to see these animals treated well. They want to see them do well. They want to, and basically, you know, they're not comfortable to see them suffering. And that's where I've come. You know, I've stuck to the rules, and you know, earlier in my career, you know, I talked a lot about how to save populations and species and habitats and whatnot, but more and more, you know, what I'm really interested in is those individuals, getting inside the head of an animal and seeing, you know, what makes you tick, because, you know, it's this bond that we have between these animals. I think that is really at the end of the day, You know, that's the one that can keep us going, you know, because these other entities, like I keep saying, populations and species and ecosystems, they sound really good, but they just don't have that emotional appeal like that individual animal is. So for me, you know, kindness is one of the things that I feel that I can do. You know, I can face to face with another animal. And you know, I was a big fan of zoos as a kid. I'm not really so much anymore, because now I see zoos as the prisons that many of them are. But boy, I so loved going to zoos and just catching the face, the eyes of these animals there, not realizing that many of them weren't all that happy at the time. But that was some of the, you know, the formation of a lot of my, you know, my philosophies and my desire to help these animals is you know, the individual and the kindness. And you know, the thing is that, you know, Darwin, for example, you know, Darwin is always credited with this line, you know, survival of the fittest. But you know, Darwin is actually, what his thinking is coming around to is that he was more into survival of the kindest. You know, what he made this idea that says, you know, those communities of people he's talking about here, those communities with the most sympathetic members are the ones that are going to reproduce the most, the ones that are going to flourish the most, you know. So he was in fight, you know, it's not competition, it's compassion that really runs the world and you know, drives evolution, if you will. So yeah, I mean, it just seems like a no-brainer that it took me a long time to get back around to.
Yeah, I'm glad you're diving a little more into that subject, because it reminds me that, you know, a lot of times those of us who go into a field of work, especially if it has to do with advocating for animals, a lot of us can trace that interest back to sort of like a conversion moment, right? When you had a teacher or an experience or an interaction with an individual animal that opened your eyes. Can you trace your interest back to a particular experience or lesson or class?
Well, yeah, I kind of can. I remember I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, and I think my mother sent me off with $1 in my hand to go get a loaf of bread at the store, which is, I don't know, a mile away or something, you know. And so I headed off, and I was coming back with the bread, and I ran across this stray dog in the street, and he was just sitting there, and you know, sounds very much like my topaz tail, but basically he was just sitting there and looked lost, and he was coming up, and I ended up sitting there until nightfall because I just couldn't leave him. My mom had to send out, started calling if whatever happened to me, because I just felt so beholden to this animal, to comfort this animal, because he looked like he was lost, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't carry him. I couldn't, you know, I didn't have a collar. I couldn't get him to come with me, and so I just sat down there on the sidewalk with him until, you know, they sent out the authorities to find me.
Oh my God.
So yeah, I mean, and I realized at that time that, yeah, I mean, animals just have a way of kind of getting into your heart. And you know, just when the time came to choose you know, a career, an education and whatnot, I said, well, you know, I didn't have any better idea than I want to work with animals. I want to do well by them. You know, I didn't really have any grand plan for making a living at it. I just decided this is what I want to do with my life.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about Towpath and his story, because he was a stray as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So same kind of thing happened, but this was more recently. This was in 2012, and I was already into the writing of the or at least the research on the Heart of the Lion book. But I was out for my morning run, and it was along the Potomac River, about 70 miles west of DC, a very rural place. No one's on there this time of day. And run up upon this animal that I thought must have been a fox or something at first, until they came up on it. And there it is. There's this little puppy standing in the middle of the trail. And, you know, same thing with that animal back in Pennsylvania. I stopped and looked him over, and I said, no collar, nobody around. And I said, well, geez, what do I do? And then I looked on the other side of him, and I realized, oh, this animal's been horribly wounded. And it was that right then I said, well, now we gotta take care of this animal. I called my wife up, and I said, you might want to come pick me up. I've got a little surprise for us. And But then this was a really telling moment, and in terms of my own education on what I was dealing with there, I think it has a lot to do with what we're going through in this society these days. I look down there, and I've had a lot of dogs in my life, usually shepherds. You know, I'm a shepherd guy, and we foster them and we find them homes, we adopt them and whatnot. But this was a case where we didn't have a dog, but I'd never dealt with this dog that was standing before me, which even as a little puppy, I could tell this is a pit bull. And at this time, all I knew of pit bulls was what I'd heard, you know, was the propaganda. And as I realized, I'm gonna have to pick this dog up and marching through the woods to get to the road to get my ride to the emergency room, right? And it just, even though he's just standing there, going nowhere, looking up very kind, I said, oh my God, he's a pit bull. What if I pick him up and he tears my face off? And I feel so silly thinking these things right now, because, you know, he's the kindest, warmest, little, most wiggle butt creature in the world. But at the time, I actually was taken in by this propaganda that said, this is a vicious animal. Sure enough, I picked him up. He didn't budge. You know, we crashed through the brush, the jungle, and got to the road. But we got to the vets in time. It was a long process. It turns out that this animal had been, somebody had apparently, and I've either had him on his back or he was doing his little appeasement thing, you know, as dogs do on their back, scratch my belly, and decided it was a good idea to pour acid all over him, and burned about a third of his body, third-degree burns. It was, I think that was one of the more difficult months of our lives. My wife and I, bringing him back, we became nursemaids, and, you know, every day, we didn't have the money to keep him in an emergency room every day, so we had to basically, you know, drive him to and from, get directions from the vets, and try to do the thing at home. And it was just excruciating. But boy, the paybacks. He's just been the most wonderful, wonderful addition. And we learned so much from him. And so I decided after the line book, I was going to write a book about cruelty and compassion based on what this animal had taught me. And there's so much literature and so much going on, particularly with his breed. Pit bulls are, you know, like lions, like wolves, they're in the domestic world, they're the most persecuted dog there is right now. For many of the reasons that I didn't want to pick them up at first, is because I was afraid. I'd heard all the rumors, you know, but what we learned was that these are some of the most loving creatures on God's green earth. And so it really taught me a lesson about checking your assumptions before you know, proceeding. And, you know, so anyway, I went through this long, painful, you know, research on compassion and cruelty, because again, it's like the mountain lion story. There's a lot of cruelty involved, and you know, I bailed. You know, it failed. The proposal I wrote didn't please my agent, didn't really please me, and I said, you know, I was burned. I couldn't stand all the cruelty that I had to go through to actually tell this story, because there's so much out there. And that's when I just said, okay, I have a better idea. I'm gonna make up a fictionalized story, and it's gonna come out really good. It's gonna be a feel-good story, and we're gonna reach some of the kids that, you know, might turn out to be those kids who would have done this horrible thing to me in the first place. So that's what I did. I tried to distill these 2 years of research into on compassion and cruelty into a 500-word story with pictures, and that's what came out as Towpath's Tale.
Wow, what a story. And especially the parallels between pit bulls and mountain lions. And like you mentioned at the start of this conversation, the importance of educating kids to create more kindness in the future. I can relate as a pit bull mom when we're out in public. If people ask if they can pet my pit bull and they come up and they're, you know, very happy to see her, I always thank them for, you know, not being afraid to come say hi to her.
Yeah.
Well, I want to let everybody know that we've reserved the last 20 minutes for question and answers. So you'll have a chance to ask your questions to Will. You're going to use the raised hand feature. And when your name is called, remember that you may have to unmute yourself. And Will, I'll let you know too that if Towpath is around and you'd like to introduce us all to Towpath, then really good time.
Yeah, so I think I'll do that. I'm just going to have a seat here on the floor, which is actually my desk. And he's taking a nap right now, but we'll see if he'll come out and join us. So,
does he snore like my pit bull does?
Loud he does. What's that?
Yeah. It's one of their most endearing qualities, I think. Oh, there he's awake now.
There he is.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a vicious pit bull. Careful.
Yeah, yeah.
He'll rip your throat out.
Oh, I love those big old wacky heads.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Well, I think we have some.
Janet, you're going to be up first. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
And Janet, you may have to unmute yourself.
Unmute. Okay. Okay. Hi, Will. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. My question is, do you know what impact the border wall construction in California, Arizona, and Texas is having on mountain lion migration?
I don't know about mountain lions. I don't think there's as much concern for mountain lions as there are for jaguars and ocelots, which are very, very rare in this country, but do make forays back and forth over the border. And that's where I think most of the concern is, from what I've heard from some of my colleagues down there, is that, you know, we've only had a few jaguars that have actually made it across into the United States. We're hoping that they would establish a population, but this border wall is making things really iffy. So there are, and same with ocelots in South Texas, they are very concerned that the passage of these animals. And again, the thing is that these big cats, they do a lot of wandering. And so this is, you just don't box them up very easily and have them thrive. You need to have this back and forth, especially if we're going to get a population started.
Hi, Bob. You're up next. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Will. Given that female cats tend to stay near their mother's territory, how long would you estimate that it would take for a breeding population to establish in the eastern U.S. by natural dispersion? If we did translocation, and if somehow we could get them through the Midwest without them being killed?
Thanks, Bob. So you're saying that without translocation, letting them do it on their own organically, how long would that take? Yeah. Well, the Cougar Rewilding Foundation has been looking into this very subject for a long time now, and they're not very optimistic of this happening anytime soon, decades, if that. Because the problem is, again, what has to happen is that there's this big void. It's called the Great Plains. John Landry, the cougar biologist, calls it the Great Wall, where there's just a culture that is against these animals, and you have to set up a breeding population every time you leapfrog, right? The female will go, sometimes they will make long forays. They'll go 100, 200 miles away from their birthplace. More likely they stay next to their mother in the territory next door, but they will make these forays into the prairie. But what's got to happen then, they've got to meet a male. And then they've got to have kittens, and the kittens have to survive and in order to keep this leapfrog going. And it's just not happening. We see these maps, with basically right now, the cougar population stops at the eastern edge of the Rockies with a few little satellites out there, like Black Hills, and Nebraska has a few little tiny populations. For the most part, that's where it stops. And for the animals to get across the Great Plains into the forests of the East, they've got to cross that great big void of very, very treacherous territory. And to think of them actually setting up shop, two have to meet each other. Number one, they have to have kittens. And then for those to reproduce and keep on going, when right now, everyone that is seen in these areas, they get shot. I mean, that's just what happens. That is the knee-jerk reaction. There's a cougar, we shoot it. So the odds aren't really good. I mean, most of us who are in this hoping to see them make that leap, we're not counting on that. We're counting on translocation.
Hi, Margaret. You're up next. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Margaret? Yeah, hi.
Okay. I'm running a conservation movie discussion group, and our selected movie for this month is The Mountain Lions of California. And so I'm wondering if there's anything specific that you would like to recommend to these people than the movie discussion group that would benefit the mountain lions?
In
Anything?
California?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, number one, and Michelle already mentioned this one, right now there's a population in the Santa Monica Mountains that consists of maybe 10 or a dozen mountain lions that is in really deep trouble. I mean, they're starting to show signs of inbreeding, genetic abnormalities and whatnot. And the problem is they are hemmed in there. You know, the sort of highways that they have to cross, the 101, the 405, to get into this thing is just almost insurmountable. And then, you know, to get back out. So there's almost no back and forth, no integration of new genes into that population. And they're starting to show it now. So there is a movement now to get an overpass built and a fund being taken up to get this very expensive overpass that will allow cats north of the highway to cross back and forth. Because right now it's a really sad situation where all the young males that are born to this population, there's usually only one adult male in this population who circles around, one or two at least. These young males have a choice. They either have to fight for their own territory, which means fighting their father, and they're usually going to get killed that way, or they have to cross these highways that's almost certain death. Very few animals have done that. So I would say, first off, this is a population in deep trouble and they need help right now.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
Hi, Dan, you're up next. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Will. I wondered if you could speak to the difference in the success of the translocation and reintroduction of wolves for many years now across the country, and why mountain lions seem so many years behind in the acceptance of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, because wolves are so much more politically divisive. I mean, it took a lot of, and for one thing, there was a concerted effort to make that happen. First of all, when they brought them these wolves from Canada into Yellowstone National Park to repatriate the park, and then and into Idaho, which is where they spread from. Yeah, I mean, it took years of just concerted effort by dedicated conservationists to try to get the political wheels turning in favor of doing this. I don't know why that people have not decided to do the same thing. I just don't think there's been the lobby, the effort, the support on the ground for doing this for mountain lions, because to me, and I think to a lot of conservationists, mountain lions are a lot easier to deal with. You know, they don't travel in packs, they don't howl, they don't cause quite the animosity that wolves do. You know, it's my hats off to the fact that we actually got these populations started right now. But that being said, I mean, they're now, the states are blasting away at them. As soon as we turn over the power to the states to manage them as they see fit, it's both barrels blazing on them. So I don't have a good answer for that as to why it's been taken so long. They've discussed this with the panthers, for example. You know, we know we need to get Florida panthers out of South Florida because they're bottled up here too. And in fact, we had to bring in some Texas cougars some years ago to introduce new genes into that population because they're having the same problems as the one in the Santa Monica Mountains, right? So they did a study, they tried them out, you know, and they did just fine in North Florida. So, but then I think the authors decided, well, they could do this biologically, it's good, but socially, I think it's unacceptable, which, you know, I think is a pretty lame answer, but I think what they needed, we just need to keep pressuring these people. There's no reason they shouldn't be here.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Linda, you're up next. Please go ahead and ask your question. Linda, it looks like your audio is on. You should be good to talk.
Hi, Linda.
I think we'll move on to the next questioner and come back to Linda. Looks like it's Avil Pearl 273. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Hello?
Hello.
My name is Paula. I have a really good question, I think. I'm wondering why small mountain lion populations are being hunted. I know that the Pine Ridge mountain lion population in Nebraska, is quite small and it's being hunted. Like there are maybe like 2 dozen cats. I think it's ridiculous. And in the North Dakota mountain lion population is hunted too, and there aren't very many cats up there.
Yeah, no, I'm shaking my head here. I mean, we Cougar Cougar fans have been scratching our heads over that one too. But again, this is I mentioned this earlier, in that in places like Nebraska and North Dakota, where you mentioned, basically the order there is that, or the philosophy there for game management is, well, we start with the idea that we have to kill these animals, and then we decide how many we're going to kill. There's never a discussion of, well, should we not kill them? Although they did, when they realized that they finally had, in Nebraska, for example, they had a small population, I think 15 animals. They went through some deliberations in it, and there was a lot of pushback from a lot of people saying, what are you thinking about? But in the end, yeah, they okayed it, and they had a hunt. And then they ended up killing, way too many cats, and just about, blew the population away. So they waited for them to build up again, and gave them, I think, a couple of years reprieve, but they're back at it again. So yeah, it's just this philosophy that says they need to be shot, and we need to have a really good reason not to do it. That's their starting point.
What about North Dakota? I mean, I don't think there are a lot of cats up there that they're being hunted.
Yeah, well, there's more in North Dakota than there are in Nebraska. More habitat, and yeah, but still, the same applies. You have to ask your question why, and they trot out the same reasons that I mentioned earlier. The human safety, which is not an issue, livestock safety, and they don't want any deer to go to mountain lions that they could otherwise shoot.
Okay. Yeah. And
Will, looks like our next question is from Kathy, who was having a few audio challenges, and she asks, I live in Connecticut, where the lion was found that was killed on the Parkway. I'm wondering where in New England these cats could safely be reintroduced. Vermont, where the university's mascot is the catamount, or is there resistance from the dairy farming industry?
Great question. Yeah, why aren't they there? There's all sorts of habitat in New England. There's the Great North Woods of Maine. There's the Green Mountains of Vermont, the White Mountains of New Hampshire. There's the Adirondacks of New York. I mean, there could be hundreds, maybe 1,000 cats roaming New England because there's just plenty of habitat, lots of deer, and we don't. Again, but this is places where this survey was taken, whereby, I think a large percentage of the people there, over 70%, have already said, and this is a poll. I take it that these things can be ephemeral, but this is a poll that said, 70% of the people, over 70% said, yeah, we would willingly submit to having mountain lions in our neighborhoods. So, again, it's a political will sort of issue. The game agencies, they don't want the problems with that. They just don't want to have to deal with the complaints that there are going to be some, because there's this minority that just hates them, and they're going to be really loud, and they're going to be a thorn in the side of all of the game agents and so they just don't want to deal with it for the most part.
Hi, Nitya, you're up next. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, hi, Will. Thank you for your talk. It's wonderful. I was just wondering if you have any references or links to the topic of compassionate conservation, or kindness, or conservation with kindness.
Yes. And let me see, I don't know that I could recite them right off the top of my head, but I can certainly post them somewhere, a list of them for you to get started. And yeah, it's fascinating reading. Well, yeah, maybe Michelle would have something. Maybe we could post them here on the MLF site.
That would be great.
Yeah, whatever. Well, I'll let Michelle and the Mountain Lion Foundation folks help me with that, but I'll be happy to supply them, sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hi, Augusta. You're up next. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Hi, Will. It's Gussie. It's so good to hear you. And I don't want to, I don't want to take away from the theme of the mountain lion, but I also know you're always going down the road to tell the next dramatic story. And I appreciate your storytelling and
Thank you. Yeah.
What's your next project besides Towpath?
I can't say. No, if it was farther enough along that I feel good about that, because it would be, it'd be kind of a advertising, but at this point it's still baking. So I'm going to decline. Sorry.
Is there a creature that's got your heart at the moment?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That's fair.
Yeah. No, sorry about that. Maybe we'll have to have a private discussion about that, Gussie.
And thank you for all the work that you do to support all of these animals. I'm still from the Where the Wild Things Were, from that book on, it amazes me that you can transmit that story in such a positive light.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hi, Susan. You are up next. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi. Hi, Will. I'm in Vermont, and I'm also a lover of predators, as you are. I've been involved with Big Cats in Africa with the Lion Guardians, also involved with the Rocky Mountain Wolf Project, different efforts. But I'm in Vermont. My husband and I have a lot of acreage that's wooded and I think it's ideal habitat. And there have been 5, possibly 6 sightings since the middle of August of what credible witnesses think is a mountain lion. And one man manages our orchards, and he saw it from the top of his tractor. He said it had a long body, a long tail. He saw the tail distinctly, and he knows bobcats. Another neighbor said she saw it twice. It's 7 feet long, nose to tail. And I would like to know what I can do, who I can reach out to protect this creature if he's out there. I'm assuming it's a male.
Probably, yeah. Number one, get a picture.
I know.
Yeah. Do you have a trail cam?
We have 2 neighbors have set up trail cams. I'm in Pennsylvania now. I'm going up tomorrow. We're going to set up some trail cams. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, someone called the game warden, and he came out and he brought a compassionate wildlife photographer to set up some trail cams on our property. We have 1,000 acres that's adjacent to a lot of other vast acreage. So if he's there, I just want to do everything possible to protect him.
Yeah, thanks for your considerations of that cat. But that's the key. I mean, that's the key. There's so many sightings out there, and so many of them are bogus. And there's a lot of them that are hoaxes too. Some of them are mistaken. But the thing is, this day and age, with everyone with a cell phone camera and trail cams everywhere, I'm surprised actually that the conservation officer came out, because they get thousands of these calls. So what you really need to do is get that photo, because I mean, there's going to be a lot of skepticism until you have that photo in hand, because that's the one thing that is lacking for so many of these sightings, hundreds upon hundreds of them over the east, is that people swear they've seen these things up and down, but they don't have the proof, the proof. Or, of course, the other thing would be scat. If you could get a leaving from that animal, DNA will tell you really right away, not only what species it is, but they'll tell you where it came from. If that cat came from the Black Hills, they'll tell you that. So yeah, good luck with that, because if you really are seeing this animal multiple times. Now there is one problem with that though, is that, these animals don't really hang around like that. They have a pretty wide territory. And if this animal is alone, he's probably looking for a mate. And I'm actually surprised to hear that you're hearing multiple sightings of it. So you know, it's a mystery at this point. I would just say, yeah, do whatever you can to get that photograph.
Hi, Mary, you are up next. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm actually in California. I'm very close to that proposed wildlife crossing, going from the Santa Monica Mountains to the Santa Susana. And I know off and on, we've actually talked about doing some kind of translocation because there's such a fractured population. And for your listeners, there's like 6 or 7 fractured populations in California, from Southern California to Northern California. And we know the success of the Florida translocation, so it's been off and on talk. And early on, when they discovered P22 in Griffith Park, there was talk about moving him from there because he's the only lion there in a very limited space.
Right.
It's, you know, it's interesting because we're now, like you said, we're now seeing physical evidence of inbreeding population in that Santa Monica Mountain group. And in fact, there's going to be a presentation in about an hour on P22's Facebook page about that.
Okay.
Where there's going to be a discussion about that. And for the listeners, what happened is they found a male mountain lion that has a kinked tail and only one testy is descended. So that was what they feared for a long time was going to happen, because we had a lot of cats who were breeding with their daughters. And so this wildlife crossing we've been talking about is going over one of the busiest freeways in Southern California, and will be putting together 2 of the largest lion populations here in Southern California. And even just recently in the last couple of days, we had a male mountain lion killed on the freeway again. Oh, yeah. So, and that's one of our biggest problems, is just these cats trying to get across these major freeways and getting killed. And so, you know, we did talk about, you know, off and on.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Yeah, I should tune in.
Okay. I know there are other people waiting to ask questions, and you will be, Deborah's going to explain how you can pass your questions along to Will if you still have questions that you didn't get a chance to ask. But thank you, Will. Thank you, Towpath, for being our guest. We're so glad to see that he hasn't let the fame go to his head. And then I'll turn it back over to Deborah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.